On the day of my final exams, my parents kicked me out after their daughter announced her pregnancy. However, a year later, they have both reached out to me in an effort to reconcile. I was expelled from my home by my parents approximately a year ago, just a few weeks after my 18th birthday. This was not the most severe aspect of the situation. It coincided with the final exams in high school, leaving me with no place to stay. Fortunately, I had supportive friends, and my best friend and her parents generously offered me a place to live. I am immensely grateful to them. The reason for my parents' decision to evict me was due to my older sister's pregnancy, prompting them to have her return home to ensure her proper care. It is important to note that she is not my full biological sister. She is my half-sister. My mother was dating Jacob, my stepfather, during college when she became pregnant a few months before their graduation. However, she was too young at the time, so she decided to give birth to the baby but did not want to marry him, as their relationship was meant to be a fling and they had broken up. Despite this, Jacob still wanted to be a father, so they decided to co-parent, and I, Sasha, my half-sister, was born. They maintained contact after that. When Sasha was 3 years old, her mother met my biological father. They dated for 2 years and married. 1 year into their marriage, she became pregnant with me. Despite her desire to keep the baby, my father was not prepared for fatherhood. He wanted to terminate the pregnancy, but my mother could not agree. Consequently, they separated over this issue. After my father walked out on my pregnant mother, she severed all ties with him and his family, choosing to reconcile with Jacob. Thus, when I was born, my father was absent, and I was raised by my mother and stepfather. We married a few years after her divorce from my father was finalized, but I have never been able to accept him as my family because he has never treated me like that. I believe the only reason he reconciled with my mother while she was pregnant with me was to gain her favor, and perhaps he was still in love with her. However, I was always a burden to him, and he has always been cold to me since I was a child. Even Sasha behaved the same way towards me. Despite a generally amicable relationship with my mother, I have never been able to develop a bond with Jacob and Sasha, despite our shared family history. This has not affected their treatment of me, which has always been distant. My mother has always claimed to love me equally, but it has never felt that way because she has never acknowledged the distance between us. When I was younger, I attempted to forge a connection with them, but was consistently rejected. After reaching adulthood and understanding the dynamics, I ceased any attempts to establish a relationship with Jacob and Sasha. I was not surprised when they decided to evict me from the house due to Sasha's pregnancy and her desire to return home. However, it was a shock to me. I should have anticipated that for Jacob, Sasha would always be a higher priority, regardless of her age compared to me. I had hoped that my mother would support me, but she did not. Approximately a year ago, just 2 days before finals week was about to commence, Sasha informed us that she was expecting. She was 6 years older than me, making her 24 years old at the time. Despite her age, my parents decided to evict me to make room for her, allowing her to save money. Sasha, accompanied by her boyfriend, who had been with her since high school, resided in a small apartment located a short distance from our residence. I anticipated that she would remain there, but she expressed a desire to return home due to her discomfort with living alone. She works from home, and her boyfriend commutes daily for work, occasionally requiring travel. During her pregnancy, she believed it would be more convenient for her to live with her parents, avoiding the isolation of the apartment. Additionally, she would save on rent, as her boyfriend planned to move in with her. Consequently, she and my parents agreed on her relocation. While I would have been fine with it, they informed me that I had to vacate the premises for a few months as they required the space for her to. Sasha had previously occupied a room in our house, but after her departure for college, Jacob repurposed it as an office. My parents informed me that I could not remain in the living room. The only feasible solution was for me to vacate my room, which they framed as a sacrifice for the family. I would not have been as disheartened had it not been for a conversation they had with me right before my first exam. I was already under considerable stress due to upcoming exams, but the focus was solely on Sasha and her pregnancy. I made it clear that I would not leave, as I had never considered Sasha my family and had never been treated as such. Despite my parents' attempts to reason with me, I felt they were being unreasonable and continued to argue until they finally gave in. Jacob threatened to evict me by the end of the week or face expulsion. As an adult, I believed my mother would support me, but she agreed with Jacob, stating that they needed to make space for their biological grandchildren and lacked the time and energy to fight with me. Consequently, I had no choice but to comply. The realization that my mother used the term real grandkids solidified my long-held belief that my mother, Sasha, and Jacob formed a unique family unit, while I was perceived as an outsider. This revelation deeply upset me, leading me to hastily pack my belongings without regard for an impending exam. Despite my departure, they did not attempt to dissuade me, which clearly demonstrated their priorities. Upon sharing my situation with my best friend and her parents, they offered me a place to stay indefinitely. Many of you may be wondering why I did not seek assistance from my family. Allow me to clarify that I do not have any family members who are close to Jacob's family. They do not like me at all, and I knew it would have been pointless to approach them because helping me out would be the last thing they would do. As for my mother's side of the family, I have never met them. Apparently, her parents and the rest of our family had cut her off when she first got pregnant with Sasha because they wanted her to focus on getting her degree and didn't want her to go through with the pregnancy because she was just too young. But she went through with it anyway. And since then, nobody from her family has ever spoken to her. They were not even there at her wedding to my father, nor were they there when Sasha or even I was born. At least that's what she told me. So I didn't think that I had any family that was going to be able to help me out. So I had to approach my friends instead. Following my expulsion, I found myself living with my best friend and her family. I anticipated my mother's contact, but I harbored no such expectations from Jacob or Sasha, knowing they never cared for me and were likely relieved by my departure. The absence of my mother's outreach after I left was particularly painful. After a few months, I resigned myself to the belief that she would not reach out. A year has passed since then, and I have heard from a few friends that Sasha has given birth a few months ago. She and her boyfriend have been posting about how they are proud parents to their daughter. 3 of them are still living with my parents, presumably because they want to save money on rent. I couldn't care less about it, to be honest. After graduating high school, my primary focus was on improving my life. I had to consider how to finance my college education, as I no longer had any financial support from my parents. My best friend's parents generously allowed me to live with them rent-free, but I couldn't expect them to cover my college expenses as well. I was quite concerned about this, but fortunately, I had applied for several scholarship programs. As a diligent student, I was awarded a scholarship by one of the colleges I had applied to. Although it was not my first or second choice, I accepted the offer to save money, as the scholarship covered 60% of my tuition. I took out a student loan with the assistance of my best friend's parents, who acted as co-signers. I assured them that they would not have to worry about repaying the entire amount, as I would be working alongside my studies. My intention was to repay the loan independently, despite the challenges. It has been a difficult journey, but ultimately, I am confident in my ability to succeed on my own, and the sense of accomplishment is quite rewarding. For the past year, I had not communicated with my family, nor did I anticipate their contact. However, a week ago, my mother unexpectedly sent me an email expressing her desire for me to return home for the weekend, as she missed me greatly. Jacob and Sasha also acknowledged their past mistreatment and sought reconciliation. My mother's tone in the email was overly affectionate, which I found suspicious. My instinct told me something was amiss, and I chose not to respond. Despite my curiosity, I refrained from replying to the subsequent emails. I was certain that there was a specific reason behind their behavior, as it was highly improbable that they had suddenly become remorseful a year after the incident. However, I received the explanation I needed 2 days ago when my grandparents reached out to me. I was surprised that they had even found a way to contact me, because I'm pretty sure that my parents did not give out my contact info to them. But they told me that they had to ask around a lot. And eventually one of my friends from high school decided to trust them and give them my phone number. It actually turned out to be my best friend, and I'm so glad that she didn't tell me anything about it, because it was a really pleasant surprise anyway. When they called me, it was difficult for me to even believe that it was really them because, like I had said, I've never known them. I had never seen them or heard their voices, and I was initially skeptical. However, They arranged a video call, presenting me with numerous photo albums featuring my mother from her childhood and teenage years. This was the moment I finally accepted that they were my grandparents. The emotional connection was mutual, and I was overwhelmed with feelings of joy and nostalgia. During our conversation, I began to share my life story with them, making a conscious effort to avoid discussing my parents. However, it was inevitable as they were already aware of everything. They revealed that their reluctance to contact me was due to my parents, and recently they had uncovered the truth, which prompted them to reach out to me. I was perplexed by this revelation, as I had only known that my grandparents had severed ties with my mother after her first pregnancy. This was all I had been told by my mother. However, it seemed there was more to the story. The reason for their estrangement was not solely due to their disapproval of my mother's young age at the time of my birth, but also because they disapproved of her relationship with Jacob. My mother had been perpetuating falsehoods about her own parents to maintain Jacob's idealized reputation. My grandparents were initially supportive of the pregnancy, allowing my mother to make her own decision regarding the baby. However, they were not comfortable with her relationship with Jacob due to his past as a well-known addict. Growing up in the same neighborhood, attending the same high school, and eventually the same college, my grandparents were well informed about Jacob's past and disapproved of his relationship with my mother. They offered financial support throughout the pregnancy and beyond, but with the condition that she must end her relationship with Jacob to avoid being influenced by him. After much contemplation, my mother decided to end her relationship with Jacob due to his persistent inability to maintain sobriety. Although it was in her best interest, she harbored resentment towards him. They managed to secure full custody of Sasha when she was born, while Jacob was granted supervised visitation rights for the initial years. Over time, Jacob completed his degree and achieved sobriety, but my grandparents remained skeptical and justified their skepticism because he would occasionally relapse. Consequently, they arranged for my mother to meet my father, who was the son of a mutual acquaintance. After intermittent interactions, my mother married him, having lost faith in Jacob's recovery. However, she never fully moved on from him, as evidenced by her return to Jacob and their subsequent affair. This led to her second pregnancy, which forced her to disclose the affair to my father. She confessed that she could not envision a life without Jacob, and the revelation of her infidelity ultimately led to her divorce from my father and her eventual marriage to Jacob. Therefore, the claim that my father was opposed to the idea of having me was a significant misrepresentation. Following my birth, several paternity tests were conducted, confirming that I was not Jacob's biological child. Instead, I was the offspring of my biological father, which was fortunate as I would not have wanted to be Jacob's biological daughter. My father even had partial custody of me for a brief period, but my memories of that time are scarce due to its distant past. Regrettably, my biological father passed away in a car accident when I was 7 months old, which conveniently allowed my mother to perpetuate her lies throughout my life. My father's family disowned me after his death, which was beneficial for my mother. My grandparents were deeply distressed upon learning of my mother's affair with Jacob. They presented her with an ultimatum: either permanently sever ties with Jacob and focus on her marriage with my father, or accept a divorce and sever all contact with them. Ultimately, my mother chose to remain with Jacob, as he had been sober for nearly a year, which was longer than any of his previous attempts to. This was the last major conflict between my mother and her parents. She was still pregnant with me at the time. They did not speak to each other until I was born, when my grandparents softened up and decided to reach out to her so they could see me. However, Jacob was not ready to play along and be a happy family with my grandparents because of the way that they had been treating him previously. So my mother also rejected their attempts to reconcile. My grandparents did not give up, though they continued to try and talk to my mother every few months, but she never accepted them back in her life. This went on for a couple of years when Jacob and my mom hit a rough patch financially and couldn't afford rent. With nobody else to rely on, my mom had to reach out to her parents, and my grandparents decided to buy her a house so she wouldn't have to worry about rent ever again. My grandparents thought that this grand gesture would get her to speak to them again, and maybe they would even be one happy family, but that didn't happen. 6 years ago, my family and I moved into a new house, a significant upgrade from our previous apartment. I was curious about how my parents could afford such a house, given its high cost and prime location. My mother worked as a receptionist and my father was in sales, but his company had been experiencing financial difficulties. It seemed unlikely that they could have afforded the house, which was beyond their budget. However, I now understand how they managed to purchase it. My grandparents had paid for the house, but my parents, despite knowing this, had not attempted to rebuild their relationship with them. My mother informed my grandparents that they needed time and space to consider reconnecting, as they had not spoken to each other for a long time, and emotionally, it was challenging for them to deal with. Initially, my grandparents were quite naive and decided to give them their space for a couple of months. However, when my mother did not reach out to them after that, they decided to try and talk to her again. But she just told them that she needed more space. This situation persisted for several years, and eventually my grandparents accepted that perhaps it was not meant to be. As they grew older, they realized that repeatedly reaching out to my mother only to be rejected was humiliating. They acknowledged their past unkindness and informed my mother that they understood her decision to distance herself from them. The only request they had made in the past was for her to send them photos of our family to reassure them that we were doing well. To their surprise, my mother agreed to this request, which has been their method of coping with the situation for the past few years. This revelation was profoundly sad, and I found myself crying when they shared this with me. Throughout my life, I had perceived them as the antagonist, but this was not the case. In any case, the discovery of the truth was prompted by my grandfather's recent health crisis, which presented several challenging issues. In response to this, my grandparents realized that they could no longer maintain the pretense of everything being fine. Given their advancing age, they resolved to confront their circumstances head-on, with the hope that before their passing, they would find satisfaction in having made a genuine effort to reconcile with their family. A few weeks ago, they unexpectedly visited my mother's house, which technically belongs to them since they paid for it, and their name is on the deed. My mother had no choice but to let them in and entertain them. They discovered that they were now great-grandparents since Sasha had had her children. However, when they inquired about me, my parents became very uncomfortable and struggled to find an appropriate response. They told them that I was away at college and that it was probably not a good day to contact me because I was in a fragile state due to exams. They were unable to even fabricate a fake college name for my grandparents, which raised their suspicions. I had a gut feeling that my parents had made a mistake and decided to speak to our neighbors after they left the house. That's how they found out that I hadn't been living with my parents for the past year after I had been kicked out. For some reason, my neighbors didn't know the exact reason, but they had a son who went to school with me, and he told my grandparents that I had been staying with my best friend for a while, so they might know something. And that's how my grandparents contacted my best friend and eventually got to know what had happened with me. When they found out the truth, they were naturally furious. And now they had told my mom that she needed to the house with her family because they needed to make space for the only real grandkid that they had. And I got to say, it was retribution at its finest because those were the exact words that my parents had said to me. And my best friend made sure that my grandparents knew exactly which nerve to hit. Suddenly, it became clear why my parents were attempting to reconcile with me. They were on the brink of losing their home. The delay in my grandparents' contact was due to their fear of my reaction. However, they eventually decided to proceed because they had already lost many years out of fear of my mother's reaction. They wanted to do the right thing. My grandparents also wanted me to have the opportunity to decide what I wanted, so they told me that if I wanted to give my family a chance, then they would still allow them to live in that house. And if I wanted them out, then that's what would be done. It was evident that nobody in the family seemed happy to see them, and I was the only one who genuinely expressed interest in having a relationship with them. My grandparents did not want to be played for fools anymore, so I had to decide whether one of my parents to have a home or not. And if I'm being honest, I think I want them kicked out, but that would be a little too vindictive. And so, I want to know if that would be the right thing to do or not. So if I told my grandparents that I wanted to kick my family out, update 1. First and foremost, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude for the overwhelming support and comments I have received since making my post. It truly means the world to me, and I cannot express enough how much I appreciate it. Regarding my decision, I have decided that my family should no longer reside in that house. I communicated this to my grandparents a few days ago, and they're currently undergoing the eviction process. According to my grandparents, there is a significant amount of legal and emotional manipulation that my parents, particularly Sasha, have attempted. However, my grandparents are immune to such tactics, as they have been informed of the negative comments my mother has made about them and the lessons she has imparted to their grandchildren. Consequently, they do not extend any sympathy to her. To be honest, Sasha and her boyfriend are self-sufficient individuals. I am certain they can make arrangements for themselves, just as many others do. The same applies to my parents. Therefore, I do not feel compelled to feel guilty about anything. After all, they did not feel guilty when they expelled me, knowing that I was only 18 and still in school at the time. Despite that, I was still able to excel academically, even though it occurred right before my exams. Regarding my college tuition, I assured my grandparents that they did not need to worry about it. They informed me that they would cover any student loans I had taken out and apologize for not being there for me sooner. We have a lot to discuss and reconcile. However, things are currently going well. The situation escalated to a point where my grandparents initiated the process of eviction in my family, and they have until the end of next month to leave. My mother is not happy about it, and she felt like it was her duty to let me know. She had emailed me a couple of weeks back trying to get back on my good side and mend things with me, probably just so that her parents wouldn't kick her out of the house. The email that she recently sent me was very different from the one that I received earlier, since this one is just full of curse words directed at me and basically just wishing that she had never given birth to me. She even said that she wished I had been in that car crash with my father and both of us had been taken out in one go. So, that's my mother for you guys. However, it doesn't matter to me because she's not my family. She's nobody to me. If I'm being honest, the only family that I have as of now are my grandparents, my best friend, and her parents, and a couple of relatives whom my grandparents are introducing to me since my mother had cut them off a really long time ago because she wanted nothing to do with her family. It's kind of all in a very weird place right now, but I know that I'll get used to it eventually. Update 3. Hi. The holidays have just started, and I have returned to my childhood home. It feels strange to be back here after my family moved out a long time ago. I don't know what they have been up to, and neither am I interested in it, but my grandparents have been staying here since they left, and they have done up the place quite nicely. And even my room feels like home once again. We are even hosting Thanksgiving dinner for a couple of family members and my best friend and her parents in a few days, and I feel like my life is getting back on track again. I'm really, really happy, and I just wish that I could feel like this forever.